Hey guys, welcome to the Rubin Report. I'm Kathleen Sebelius' hairstylist, Dave Rubin, and I've got Cara Santa Maria and Dylan Brody with me, and let's get right to it. Obamacare, the train wreck continues. I've been for this thing. I believe that everyone can and should have health care, but the website not working well, and even the libs are turning on it. And they say when you've lost Jon Stewart, you've lost the country, and it looks like Obama may have lost Jon Stewart.
It may be a bit concerning that the president was not kept in the loop about the program that is named after him, but in his defense, there appear to be very few loops he is in.
For the first time, the government reveals that it monitored some 35 world leaders, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Perhaps more shocking is that President Obama was kept in the dark about it for 5 years.
5 years? What? So for 5 years, I assume the president is being presented with the findings from this world leader monitoring. And in those 5 years, it never occurred to him to say, how are we getting this? Does the president believe in surveillance fairies?
All right, so he didn't know about this NSA thing, you know, whether you think Benghazi's a scandal or not, he didn't really know about that, or the IRS. But what's really getting him is all the quotes that they have of him talking about Obamacare. Remember, if you like your plan, you can keep it, period.
You can keep your plan if you are satisfied with it. If you like the plan you have, you can keep it. If you like your plan and you like your doctor, you won't have to do a thing. You keep your plan.
If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan.
If you've got health insurance, you can keep it.
If you like your health care plan, you will keep your plan. If you've got health insurance, you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan.
If you have insurance that you like, then you will be able to keep that insurance. If you like your doctor or health care plan, you can keep it.
If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan.
All right, so New York Magazine put that compilation together, and it actually goes further than that, but this is YouTube, so we got time constraints. Okay, so let's start with this. First off, just from watching that little clip right there before we get to the Jon Stewart stuff, do you think politicians all hate YouTube and hate the internet? Because we can now track the lies. You know, even 10 years ago, you couldn't track the lies.
Yeah, I think reporters were still tracking the lies.
But everyone can get it at a click now.
Any troll can do it, but I definitely think that this is something that would have been caught regardless. And I guess the big question is this actually a lie, or is this something where he was trying to sell the country an idea that in his mind was fully formed that he then had to pass in the Congress in order to, implement it? And so he was selling an idea that was one idea, and then, as we all knew, the law was changed piecemeal by piecemeal in order to get it to pass.
Right. So do you think he possibly didn't know that he was going to end up lying? Because everyone's saying they changed so much.
I think that the whole story is a mislead, because there's a cherry picking of anecdotal evidence that shows some people have had to give up plans.
Right.
Yes. That's a tiny percentage, 5% of the people who are previously insured, who are now having to give up their insurance. And those 5 are having to give up their insurance because their insurance was inadequate. It just doesn't meet the requirements of the mandate. And many of those will be up for governmental help for paying for the new insurance.
Right, supposedly they'll get better insurance. Even though that's not what he said, it seems like a good...
But at the same time, some of them are arguing that they will get better insurance, yes, but their premiums are going to go up. So
right, that's where there's a subsidy that can come in to help cover that premium going up.
Perhaps.
So what we're really dealing with is not a question of whether he lied, but whether he underestimated how low people would go in their insurance before they were dissatisfied with it. He was thinking, well, clearly people who have really crappy insurance don't like their insurance.
Right.
So if you have insurance you like, you're going to be able to keep it. And people went, no, I really liked my crappy insurance.
Right.
Which he just didn't anticipate.
But was he thinking that, or was he doing what you're saying, which I tend to think is probably a little closer to truth, which is he just had to sell it. So he had to keep repeating that because he had to sell it, and then once it's through, then all the nuance of the little details that you're describing come to light, but he had to sell it, so he had to keep saying it.
I mean, it's one thing to call somebody out on a lie about something that hasn't happened yet. That's a failed promise more than it is, I think, a bold-faced lie.
All right, I think that's
it's
fair.
one thing to lie, and who knows what's going on with the NSA tapes, right? With all of this evidence, we don't know what Obama was privy to and what he wasn't, and we don't know how much of that truth he's actually hiding. But I think preemptively to say in the future things will be this way. Is that really lying?
Right, it's not quite. It's a pre-lie or
it's a pre-lie,
something like that.
It is really just an overpromise, and I still think it's not even an overpromise. He just didn't realize that there would be people who went, "No, I like crappy insurance."
Yeah,
and that wouldn't occur to me.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's get to what we started with, which is the Jon Stewart stuff, because I do think it's interesting that Jon, who really basically is the most trusted man in media, is sort of turning against Obama, and it has more to do with the NSA stuff, I think. And I've been talking about this for weeks on here. It seems to me that they purposely don't tell Obama things, that they don't tell him that the website for Obamacare wasn't quite going to work. It's now come out. He didn't know. And he didn't know that the NSA was spying. Like, that they're purposely not telling.
This is a popular tactic, I think, in large corporations where the CEO ultimately, holds the responsibility for decisions that are made. So, the board may make a decision, or people underneath him may make a decision and intentionally not disclose it to him so that he can't then later be held responsible for
Is that a decent way for government to operate?
This territory was pioneered by the darling of the right, Ronald Reagan. It is under his administration that we were introduced to the expression plausible deniability.
I have that written right here.
It's a deliberate thing, and I think it's very dangerous. It's, the buck stops here, so please don't show me the buck. If it comes near me, I have to stop it. So please keep the buck in the waiting room.
Yeah.
I would like an antechamber full of bucks, please.
But at what point is that deniability really plausible?
Yes,
As you were
exactly.
saying, you see the results from the wiretap. How do you not know that they came from a wiretap?
Right.
That's
and also, it's funny you bring up the plausible deniability, because I do have it written here, but I have it written not because of Reagan, and I'm glad you brought that up. I have it written because of the movie Independence Day. Because remember when Bill Pullman, the president, finds out about the aliens and he says, well, why didn't I know about this? And they go, plausible deniability. So that's where I get my information from. Yours is probably...
I understand. Ronald Reagan really took plausible deniability to a whole new level, because during his second term as president, he didn't know he was president.
Right. So at least the second half of the second term.
So the level of plausible deniability there is really extraordinary.
Yeah. Okay. So if the system is built so that they purposely don't tell him things, and then that way he's not quite lying, then who's really in charge here? Like, is this Illuminati stuff? What are we really talking about? Is the NSA really in charge, or is the FBI? Like, who?
Well, I mean, ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, we know that big money is really in charge. But fundamentally, I mean, there's a reason that we have a division of power in this country, right? There's a reason that we have the 3 different branches of government so that they can impose checks and balances on one another. The hope is that the executor isn't ultimately in charge, because that would be too much power for one leader in a democracy. But at the same time, when it comes to the NSA scenario, I think that things are getting really, really out of hand. We even saw that Dianne Feinstein now is saying that, like, she disapproves of wiretapping of all of our allies in diplomatic arenas. Well, she was on the Intelligence Committee. I mean, she was one of the people who ordered these things.
Yeah, okay, so let's wrap up with this then, because I think it's a great point. This idea that every time something gets leaked by Snowden, everyone pretends they're outraged, except we all feel like we knew that this stuff was going on. So how does Dianne Feinstein sit there in front of the committee and pretend? She either pretends she doesn't know, or now we're not going to do it anymore.
We have been doing that. Yeah, right. Yeah. We have never done such a thing. We will never do such a thing, and we've stopped.
Exactly.
And we won't ever again.
But fundamentally, I think the issue is that this is it's a political move. It's not a move about keeping Americans safe. As long as we knew that our own phones could be wiretapped, nobody seemed to have a problem with it on the NSA or on the Intelligence Committee in Congress. But as soon as diplomacy was at stake,
right?
As soon as this was detrimental to any sort of political agenda, all of a sudden, this is something that we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, but aren't we doing it to our allies, and our allies doing it to us? Like, isn't this just standard spy versus spy, like Psych 101?
I think that's true, but I also think that we have capabilities that are far beyond a fair amount of other nations, and so in some ways we have the upper hand there.
I think we like to keep sense that we are far more technologically advanced than we are. Just for the sake of keeping the populace intimidated a little bit. And I think there is a lot of stuff going on between the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, and of course B613, where secrets are being kept from each other for the sake of proprietary information gathering and data sourcing that is so dangerous and so ugly and so nefarious that to some degree at least, even the Intelligence Committee is shocked every time they realize that they are not being told everything, because we have 3 branches of government and then a whole bunch of super secret organizations.
True.
And I think it's ugly, and I think we should all stop pretending that what we live in is a land of freedom and free expression.
I think that's an excellent
You just
point.
gave me the perfect out for a segment, so there you go. All right, let's talk about the Tea Party, those crazy kooks. According to a new Rasmussen poll, I cannot believe this, 42% of the people in America believe in the Tea Party's basic ideals, and then another 42% believe in President Obama's basic ideals. That's nuts. Those are complete polar opposites, and basically half the country believes one thing, half the country believes in the other. It might have something to do with our left brain, right brain thing. But let's look at some further numbers. 57% of GOP voters have a favorable opinion of the Tea Party movement. 77% of Democrats and 47% of voters not affiliated with either major party view the movement unfavorably. And 47% of voters believe neither party represents the American people. Thank you for that. All right, so these numbers are really interesting, and there's a lot to go on here. But let's just start with this 42-42 thing, because that seems completely nuts to me that we could be that. Well, everyone talks about how polarized we are, and of course, if you watch MSNBC, you get one set of views, and if you watch Fox, you get another, and everyone
But every
loves.
time there's a presidential election, it's like literally neck and neck. It's very rarely, it's always like 49% versus 49%.
But doesn't this seem a little more extreme? Because the Tea Party is more to the right, obviously, than mainstream Republicans, and most people would argue that Obama's probably a little more to the left.
And I would argue that Obama is more to the right of mainstream libs, of mainstream progressives.
He's more centrist.
So what I'm seeing is actually just a big push to the right across the board, and that's what worries me more.
The issue with the Tea Party thing, and I'm going to sound like a horrible educational elitist here. And
we like that around here.
That is because I personally feel that knowing things is good. Part of the difficulty with the Tea Party numbers is that it's largely made up of the undereducated. And if you've ever been accosted on Venice Boulevard, Venice Beach, by the people who take surveys for the Libertarian Party,
right.
What happens is they start off with things that make perfect. Do you believe in freedom? Why, yes, I do. Do you think that individual responsibility is a good idea? Why, yes, I do. And then you get like a third of the way into the thing, and then you go, well, I can't agree with that. Do you believe that the poor should be left to starve in the streets? No. Wait, how do we get there? And as with the healthcare initiative, if people hear Obamacare, they say no, 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 and then you break it down into the individual elements, and they go, well, yes, I like that one. Well, yes, I like that you can stay on your parents until you're 26. Well,
right.
Yes, I like that you can get healthcare. It's the same thing that goes on with Tea Party supporters. You say, do you agree that the Tea Party has some good ideas? Yes, I do. Do you agree that there should be more accountability? Yes, I do. And then they say, okay, 42% say Tea Party go.
So fundamentally, though, is that really an issue with, I think I have to kind of say that I probably disagree with the premise that the majority of Tea Party supporters are undereducated. I think that it's like a sweeping generalization.
That's just the ones in Texas.
I'm from Texas. No. I know many Tea Party members of Texas. I myself am obviously a progressive voter. I don't affiliate myself with either party, but I'm a progressive voter, and I have no interest in the Tea Party. But I have to say I disagree with that sweeping generalization. I think the issue here is more about polling. Polling is as a function to try and show us.
It's been a long time since I've had a good polling.
Let's have a good polling argument.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
I
let's
wanna
have a
do.
polling argument.
No, but really, I mean, I think it's 1,000 people. It's 1,000 representative voters. And then they ask questions in a way that there's only one, or it's either this answer or that answer, or I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's always the case. So do you fundamentally believe in the tenets of the Tea Party? Yes or no? I mean, what does that mean? How inclusive is that? You know, just to your point that you were just making.
Yeah,
So-
and isn't there something a little intellectually dishonest about sort of what the Tea Party is doing, which is they want the government to be incredibly small, right, barely exist, and yet when it comes to things like women's rights and gay rights and stuff like that, they still want to control you. So they don't like the big thing, but they want it so small it can fit in your bed.
The Tea Party is fundamentally dishonest from the start because it pretends to be a grassroots organization that is strongly and powerfully supported by big money interests in the forms of the Koch brothers and I believe Roger Ailes and other unidentified individuals with deep pockets.
Right.
So that there's really a sense that you can fool 51% of the people most of the time, and that'll be just fine.
And I think they pull from two different areas, right? They try to build a grassroots movement of kind of salt of the earth individuals who are interested in more, I'd say, libertarian values. And then they combine that with this kind of Christian right movement, and they conflate those two things, and that's where you see this this kind of juxtaposition of we want to keep the government out of our bedrooms, but at the same time we only want good Christian values in our bedrooms.
Right, it's so bizarre because if they went on the libertarian stuff, I would support that. I'm a firm believer in low taxes and having the government be basically out of our lives. But it's the other part. We're going to get to a story on that. So my last thing on this is the last number we looked at there was the 47% believe neither party represents them. I'm going to guess that you guys sort of agree with that as a general.
Well, I think it's also interesting how 47% and 42% and 42% does not equal 100% of the population.
Well,
And
I guess that was a separate question.
Right? That's another problem with polling is that if you ask the question a certain way, you're going to get a certain response.
Right,
And
so 42% like the Tea Party, but then 47% don't think
either
anyone
party.
represents.
And the 42% like Obama, and somehow, you
But
know.
what do you think about that? That basically half of the country is saying, well, we don't like any of these guys.
Well, first of all, we have to deal with the myth of democracy as we run it. Because I will point out, we don't choose who our candidates are. We are given a set of 4 or 5 people anointed by the party to choose from, and then we're going to sort of this mentalist trick. You guys choose between the ace of spades and the ace of clubs. You guys choose between the ace of diamonds and the ace of hearts. And then you choose a diamond or a club, and then you go and complain about the suits for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So we're already dealing with a closed circuit of representation, and we are not being represented because money is what drives the whole system. And more money is being taken out of the hands of the middle class, the shrinking middle class, and put into the hands of the very wealthy. And the very wealthy is who's being represented. So more than 47% of the population isn't being represented,
For sure.
regardless of how few it is that have figured that out thus far.
And that's the thing. I mean, it's really maybe that 47% are the individuals who have gotten wise to the idea that, oh, I think I'm tired of voting against my own interests.
Yeah.
Well, they're finally getting wise to it,
Exactly.
perhaps. All right, well, one of the guys who's playing to the 47% who don't seem to like the government at all is Rand Paul. And he gave a speech at Liberty University. This is Jerry Falwell's college, I suppose. And he gave a speech on eugenics. Now, first off, apparently he stole a lot of the speech from the movie Gattaca on Wikipedia. He lifted it. I don't know. I don't want to get into that. I want to talk about eugenics specifically. All right, so let's take a look at what Rand Paul said. In your lifetime, much of your potential or lack thereof can be known simply by swabbing the inside of your cheek. Are we prepared to select out the imperfect among us? Now, eugenics, and Cara, I'm going to let you give a slightly more scientific explanation than I am. Eugenics basically is the system by which people can sort of select out the less desirable, sort of. So if, let's say, 2 obese people were mating and we didn't want to have obese people mate, you would stop them from mating to get rid of obesity, which sort of maybe sounds good, but really is a very slippery slope. Clean that up for me, would you?
So, okay, I'm not by any means a eugenics expert, but you know, my background is in biology and psychology, and I think eugenics as a concept is something that can be approached historically, sociologically, biologically, whatever. So I think obviously a popular example is when we look back to Hitler's Germany, right? And so we think about the idea of Hitler wanted to have a pure race, and so he wanted to eliminate certain people from the population that he felt dirtied up the race. And I think that this is the most extreme and most disgusting example of eugenics. And I think that that's kind of what that name makes people think about when they hear that word.
Right.
And I think it's an easy scare tactic,
right,
for Rand Paul to use.
And he wanted to, so Hitler wanted to do it to breed blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, basically, and he wanted to do it through breeding. But technology has changed now, where now it can be done through science, and they can, change your eye color.
Which is still
breeding
breeding
itself is science
and
as
that's
well.
the thing, this is all still breeding. So basically what he's trying to say is that if we can use any sort of kind of genetic test to figure out if somebody has an illness in utero that's going to prevent them from leading a full and healthy life, for example, that it's immoral to terminate that pregnancy. And I think a lot of people would disagree with that. I think a lot of people, a woman finds out that she's carrying a child with a trisomy, with Down syndrome, with some sort of issue that would cause that child to live a life in horrible pain, or with some sort of issue that would cause that child to, to not be able to live at all, to not survive the birthing process or much after the birthing process. Many people would say that's completely a valid reason to terminate the pregnancy. So I think that he's taking, he's making a huge slippery slope argument, and he's making it very extreme in order to rally the troops for Cuccinelli, like to be able to support Cuccinelli there in Virginia.
Right, and again, he's doing this at Liberty University, which obviously is a Christian college, so he's playing to the religious base. I get all that.
And again, it's that intellectual dishonesty and self-confliction that goes on. Confliction? I'm going to go with that.
Sure,
I'm going to
I
stick
like
with it as though that's a word. Because he's a big Ayn Rand follower. And this is the very sort of program that she would have been all for.
Oh, completely.
That's totally valid in her mind. My
can you just explain for people that don't get why she would be for that?
Ayn Rand was in favor of a full meritocracy, that whatever works is good, and whoever has the money deserves the money, and whoever is succeeding and it's sort of a social Darwinism. Never mind the fact that by the end of her life she was broke and living off of government assistance, because once she needed it, it was just fine. I feel that Ayn Rand, as a writer and as a philosopher, came up with very simple, very clear answers to questions that by all rights should trouble us deeply throughout our lives. The last thing we should find for them is simple, clear answers. And when Rand Paul then says eugenics is this horrible thing at a Christian university, be aware that in many ways the Catholic Church itself has been running the longest running eugenics project in history, starting in the Dark Ages, before the Dark Ages, when they started pulling the most intellectually capable members of society out, making them celibate, bringing them into the church and educating them, while encouraging those who weren't worthy of that education to reproduce like bunny rabbits, thereby creating generation after generation after generation of less capable critical thinkers over now, centuries?
Unfortunately, that strategy doesn't work because, as we all know, evolution occurs in a more Darwinian fashion. It doesn't occur in a Lamarckian fashion.
Right.
And you can't pass on intelligence genes. It's just there's no evidence to support the fact that intelligent people are going to systematically breed more intelligent offspring just because of their genetic makeup. I mean, oftentimes if you're raised by bright parents who want to foster intellectual curiosity in you, you're more likely to become an intellectual individual as it stands. But there's really no evidence to support the fact that when smart people breed, they make smart babies, and when dumb people breed, they make dumb babies.
Is there really no evidence of that? Because
I mean,
that totally shakes the foundation of my self-confidence.
Intelligence
do you need a minute?
Intelligence is a very complicated issue to approach biologically and psychologically, but fundamentally, I think the point that you're making, that Rand Paul, based on his own kind of personal philosophy,
Right.
seems like he would be a huge supporter of eugenics.
Yes.
This is, again, a political move. This
Right.
has nothing to do with what he actually thinks.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with trying to manipulate a group of people that have strong religious values into voting a certain way.
Okay, I totally agree. This is against his political ethos, and yet he's doing it, obviously, and this goes to what we were talking about a second ago about the Tea
Well, it's
Party and the
against
religious
his
guys.
philosophical ethos,
Right.
completely
Oh, not
within his
against his
political
political
Yeah,
ethos.
exactly.
His political ethos says whatever you have to say to get the votes.
Which
Yeah.
is also it within his philosophical.
That's correct.
That's a good
correct.
point.
Full circle.
So, all right. So, removing the religious part of this for a sec, isn't
can
this?
we?
Yeah,
if
how
we
do
can,
you, how do
can
you
we
do that if we're at Liberty
Can we
University?
kind of let's see if we can do it here just for a second. If we remove the religious part for a second, isn't this eugenics actually good? But isn't this the next step in human evolution, that we will systematically remove the things that are bad about us, that are genetically wrong with us, and that we will?
It's a deep moral issue that I think, regardless of whether or not you subscribe to any sort of religious denomination, can still be a difficult one to swallow. And I think it's because it's a very nuanced situation. We already we're more subject to what we would call artificial selection than natural selection, right? We make decisions based on who we're going to mate that are outside of kind of random natural decisions.
Right, so we're all doing it on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
same way that we breed our dogs in order to have very specific traits.
I was told I'm not allowed to breed with my dog.
You're not allowed to do that. But when you breed two dogs together to have
Oh,
very
I
specific
see. I
traits,
misunderstood.
what you
I'm
end up is a bunch of different breeds of dog who look so different, from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane, and they're all the same species, right? And you see that in some respects within humankind, right? You see mating based on all sorts of different reasons, maybe based on looks, maybe based on intelligence, based on, kindness, whatever the case may be. So we already make decisions about how we're going to procreate, and we're fundamentally in charge of those decisions. So on the light end, you might want to call that eugenics. I don't know. On the heavy end, trying to wipe out certain people because we disagree with them philosophically, because we disagree with them politically. I think I'm an atheist. I don't subscribe to a religion at all. I'm very much against organized religion, but that to me is fundamentally immoral. It has nothing
because
to do with religion.
you could eliminate, if they found the gay gene. This is what everyone says. They'll find the gay gene and then they'll get rid of gay.
It's just another reason to kind of have an in-group, out-group status, and to push a hate agenda. So I think you got to find that middle ground where we're talking about somebody who's not a person yet, right? You're talking about an embryo, and that embryo has such heavy genetic damage that it's going to create a life that potentially couldn't live on its own, or that would be in such pain and would struggle so much that the mother, because it is still her person, right? As long as that is still an embryo inside of her, it's a human rights issue, and she has the right to terminate that pregnancy. I think that's a completely different issue than eugenics.
Yeah. Oh, you just brought up so much good stuff. We're gonna have to do another segment on
Let
it
me,
next week.
first of all, for the record, let me also say that I am also an atheist. I am so completely an atheist that when people tell me they believe in God, I don't believe them. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
I think we get into trouble when we talk about, is this good or bad that we can do it? Because I think science in its purest form is neither good nor bad. It is neutral. The question is how new discoveries and new abilities are then applied. And you draw the line at, would a life be in so much pain or so incapable of taking care of itself? Mine would be, will it be forced to live with my parents?
That's my line. Yeah.
But there are all sorts of different lines that can be drawn, and these are very individual decisions and very individual choices, and they lie with the woman in question. They lie to some degree with the man in question if there's an agreement as to who's going to wind up raising this.
And they lie with the voting public. I mean, fundamentally, what you're saying about science, I do think that there is some morality wrapped up into science, because science fundamentally is done by people, and they have agendas before they set out to do their science. But ultimately, I think that regulation is to be left to the regulators, and I think that a voting public needs to be choosing how we regulate science.
And at that point, you need true democracy, where the voting public is making the decision, not moneyed interests that are then chosen by the voting public to represent the supposedly voting public's interest, and in fact is
Right, and we
transgender
keep
pays.
our voting public so dumb that they're not informed well enough to make the right
Exactly
decisions
right.
on this kind of stuff. But all right, we got a perfect segue here because I was driving down La Cienega here in LA yesterday, and I saw this billboard, and I tweeted it out because I could not believe it. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is in the middle of LA, like the heart of LA. To all our atheist friends, thank God you're wrong. AnswersInGenesis.org. Now, I tweeted it out and I tagged you and you retweeted it, and then a zillion people retweeted it. And then I started doing a little more research on it. Turns out this is not just in LA, this thing. There is a massive digital billboard for it in Times Square right now. Okay, there's obviously no audio there because it's a digital billboard in the middle of Times Square. So the guy who created this thing is Ken Ham, and you may know Ken Ham because he is the guy that started the Creation Museum in Kentucky. What's the Creation Museum? Well, we've got a picture from there too. Yeah, that's what appears to be a caveman or a cave boy, and he's playing with a dinosaur.
Enjoying the smell from behind the dinosaur, apparently.
Yeah, this is the dinosaur fart exhibit is what you're looking at there. Okay, so we got a lot here to work with. Now, just first off, let's just look at the billboard for a second. It actually struck me as offensive. It's really hard to offend me. I'm a comedian. I believe in free speech. The guy can do whatever he wants. But I just kept thinking as I was watching that, if you had said, hey, Jews, hey, Muslims, thank God you're wrong, people would be up in arms. But it seems to me you're still allowed to attack atheists.
I think that, I think fundamentally, and I could be wrong about this, but that billboard was a direct response to an atheist movement billboard that was also posted. I can't remember what the atheist movement billboard said, but it was something about being inclusive and, you know, atheism is not horrible. And then this response came up that was, I think, tongue-in-cheek. I mean, it's obviously tongue-in-cheek, but it's like, it's sharp and biting, but also kind of nice. Like all of my, you know, Christian friends in Texas, they're so kind when they deliver those biting words.
Atheist, I'll pray for you.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but I don't know. I mean, it doesn't offend me. Maybe it's because I'm just so cynical about it at this point, and I've developed such a thick skin. But yeah, I mean, like you said, you're a defender of free speech.
Right. Okay, so I'm not saying that he can't do it. I'm not. You could do whatever you want, say whatever you want. But really, had it been, oh, hey, Jews, hey, Muslims, thank God you're wrong, wouldn't people be going bonkers?
I have a twinge of that every time I see any religious advertisement.
Anyway.
But to my mind, it simply proves how misguided organized religion is to begin with.
Yeah.
Because if you genuinely believe that there is an all-knowing, all-powerful deity that created the world and is so ego-driven that it needs everybody to speak its name in the right way in order for it to grant them whatever they think they're going to be granted, does it really need a marketing department?
And that's,
Right.
I mean,
he seems very insecure, that guy, doesn't he?
fundamentally, that's a very good point. I think what this billboard really goes to show is how incredibly threatened Ken Ham feels by this new kind of we're starting to see more organization within the atheist movement. And so when you have organizations like American Atheists or like the Richard Dawkins Foundation, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, whatever, and they actually are doing kind of billboards of their own, or they're starting to get people together to get out the message, and all of a sudden Ken Ham says, oh shit.
Yeah.
You know, are people going to buy into this? I got to do something about it. That shows that he thinks that this is a legitimate movement, and he thinks that that it's got power.
Yeah. So are atheists actually coming out of the closet now, so to speak? Because last time you were on the show, we did a thing about how Barney Frank, who was openly gay in Congress for 25 years, he had to wait, or seemingly had to wait, until he retired to finally announce that he was an atheist. So is there an actual movement, and do they see it as a threat?
I think it's starting to happen. I think the internet, in many ways, has freed up people to express their true selves in ways that they couldn't before. People with odd fetishes, people with outside of the mainstream religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs, people who have had thoughts that made them feel entirely isolated and alone in a world that presented religion, particularly our nation, presented religion as the norm, and a very particular puritanical kind of religion as the norm, found out that they were not alone in the world, and they immediately begin communicating and wanting to organize and get together and tweet up, as 'twere. Tweet up, as 'twere.
As it were.
But I think one of the fundamental issues with a conversation about there being an atheist movement is that at its core, atheism is a lack of belief in a higher power. So I always try to make the distinction when I talk to people about my own atheism that it's not that I believe there is no God, it's that I simply don't believe in a God. And when you have a lot of different people who simply don't believe that there's a higher power that exists, there's nothing fundamental banding them together. There's no tenets of atheism, there's no mantra, there's no church that we go to. And so because of that, talking about an atheist movement, I think makes more sense in when we reference maybe a secular movement, a group of individuals who understand that we want to protect the First Amendment, that we want to keep church and state separate, that we want to make sure that religious interests aren't impeding on our own rights as individuals, infringing on our own rights, and that, you know, a secular nation from a governing perspective is a nation that we need to uphold. It's not really about getting an atheist agenda.
So here's how difficult it is for us to bond together. I actually disagree. I go the other way on atheism. It's not that I don't believe in a God. I believe there is no God. I believe that all of that is goofy, superstitious mythology, and that people do believe it is baffling to me. And part of the difficulty we have is that the democracy as we practice it comes, and more importantly, capitalism as we practice it, comes out of a feudal society. And the feudal society that it comes out of was a religious feudal society where the leaders were anointed by God. And we have not fully evolved beyond that as a nation. We still require certainly on the right, they require their candidates to say, God told me to run. And on the left, they require their candidates to still say, I believe in God.
To still say, I get Bible verses on my BlackBerry every morning.
Yeah, right. Exactly. There's this sort of nod toward religion in the fundamental actions of our democracy as it stands right now, of our political process. And I think that we do have to be active as atheists and as a secular community to make certain that we continue to move farther and farther away from feudalism, not back toward it.
Okay, so final thought on this. Then how do you, if you have two atheists here who sort of believe in a slightly different version of what that means to you personally, how do you gin up the base then? Because because it's so easy to do for the religious people, right? And it's so easy to do for the diehard partisan hacks on both sides. How do you gin up a base of rational people, secular people?
There are atheists who don't think we should. There are many atheists who think that this is not a movement and this is not a group of people that should be banded together. There are other atheists who do think that there should. I just spoke last weekend at the CFI conference or the CFI summit in Tacoma.
You get all the good gigs.
I spoke earlier this year at American Atheists, and there are humanist societies, free thinker societies, skeptic societies where I often visit, and it takes all kinds. And so I think fundamentally, again, if you want to rally a base and you want to have an organized movement, that movement needs to be a political movement. It's not going to be a religious movement because there's a lack of religion here that's fundamental to being an atheist.
Yeah. Dylan, bring this thing home.
I think if you want to support the idea of a secular society and a secular nation, the way to do it is by supporting the sciences, by supporting education, by supporting anything that promotes the arts, supporting anything that promotes free thinking and critical thinking and the expansion of the intellect and the mind.
He brought it home. All right.
I did.
Well, guess what, people? Maybe we don't need God nor anything to believe in because we have Facebook. That's right. Facebook has now, researchers at Cornell University have figured out that Facebook can actually predict whether you and your partner will break up. There's something called the dispersion theory. Let's look at it. This is the Facebook theory of dispersion as written by the Cornell researchers. They took the data sets of 1.3 million Facebook users listed as being in a relationship and found that the more well-connected their mutual friends were, the more likely they were to break up. Now, I thought this was kind of interesting because offhand, I would have thought if you have a lot of mutual friends, it means you have a lot of mutual interests and a lot of connections, maybe with family or whatever, whatever, and that would give you more reason to stay together, but this actually proved the reverse.
I think if you have a lot of mutual friends, you're that much more likely to wind up out at dinner one night going, wait, you told him I like that? Are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
I think much as we need separation of church and state, there is some need for separation of family and social life. And there's some overlap. Of course there's some overlap. But, sometimes I like to just go out and spend time with people who I have a separate existence with, a separate set of interests, and then when I'm done, I go home and untie my wife.
All right, well, on that note, let's take a couple look at some of the other findings here. So couples with high dispersion have mutual friends who are not well connected, and couples with low dispersion have mutual friends who are well connected. Now, what I think is interesting about this, and I think you'll buy into this, is that this isn't totally a scientific survey, because the subset of people that you're talking about here are all people that are on Facebook, which maybe only a certain type of person is on Facebook
and also
in the
there are
first
people
place,
on
right?
Facebook who have chosen to
Yes.
display that they're in a relationship, which is, I think, another subset, right? I've never once said whether or not I'm in a relationship on Facebook, so
I've
they
been
wouldn't
meaning
have
to
that.
ask you about that.
Yes,
Right?
and by the way,
Exactly.
what's the situation?
So the issue is they wouldn't have that data point on me,
Right.
So I mean, I think it's a fascinating study because there's so much interesting data. It's a big data study, right? You can look on Facebook, you can see who is linked to whom, and then you can look at shared friends within their circle. That data is available, and you can compare it and see if you can figure something out. Now, I wonder, how long did they wait to see if these people broke up? It's one thing to say people with more mutual friends will break up. Well, in what length of time? Or if you wait longer, will everybody break up?
Someone's going to die.
Right, that's I think a likely outcome too. But there is something also to be said, I think, about this hypothesis that if you have your own life, you're going to have a stronger relationship with your partner because you're not constantly going to be around one another, and you're going to have a sense of independence and a sense of personal identity, which I think is very healthy.
Right, and then you go home and untie them, as you said, after they're out.
My wife and I are inherently antisocial. I go out to do things purely for professional reasons, really, and I try to be charming and I try to look like I'm enjoying other people's company. But I'm
done
really
a perfectly manageable job.
Thank
here.
you, but the truth is I'm way too much of a narcissist to care. Later on today I'll be saying I was on some show with a guy and a very I don't know her name, very attractive woman.
Well, thank you.
That's that's how much I'm
guy
taking
would've
in
been
the
nice.
information around me as I go out into the world. My point is that despite the fact that my wife and I have no friends, we do have high dispersion.
There's some point there.
I don't always know what I'm talking about when I start.
It's
Yeah,
fair,
you got-
it's fair.
you got me.
have no friends, and none of those nobodies
Buddies.
are mutual.
That's my point.
Yes.
Thank God we
That's
have a
what I'm saying.
scientist here.
None of the people that I don't know the people that my wife doesn't know.
Brilliant.
Right. So how then, watch how I do this, will the marketers use this on Facebook? Because doesn't this is exactly why
So
we're
far,
all
they
allowed
just told me I'm not allowed to breed with my dog.
Well, you definitely can't do that.
So now
well,
they're-
I think maybe in Kentucky.
They're
but
going to target these individuals and say, get out, make new friends.
Yes.
It's less likely that you'll break up with your boyfriend if you do so.
Or that they'll go the other way and say the people that are more likely to break up, they're going to have the singles websites are going to be advertising on their page,
They
right?
already know. They're going to start baiting them.
Right, there will be a targeting of the Ashley Madison
Yeah.
Oh,
ads.
gross. Those are
It's-
so gross.
Yeah.
They're so
Tell the people
gross.
what Ashley Madison is. would
Ashley
you?
Madison is a dating
As you're the
service.
one married person here,
They're
it's
a
kind of
so he knows,
interesting.
so
They're
he
a
knows.
dating service that keeps sending me emails that say, don't waste your time, have an affair.
Yeah.
Don't be sad, have an affair, which is just not helping at all
You
with
see the-
anything I'm struggling with in my life right
You
now.
see the billboards all over LA. It's so gross.
Yeah.
It's so gross.
So final thought on this, how much of all this digital stuff is really affecting our actual relationships? Like, when is it going to be like, are you going to have to Skype with someone before, now you go on an app and meet somebody, but is it going to be you're going to have to video Skype with them first and then you're going to have to text them?
I'm
Like, are we
troubled.
really doing something
There's
fundamentally?
something Orwellian
Yeah.
about the idea that we call it social networking when what we're doing is sitting alone at home at a computer. I mean, it's genuinely mind-bending to think that that's considered a social life.
But your definition of alone is that there's nobody else in the room with you physically. And I think for a lot of young people, that's not their definition of alone anymore. And I think that there's a whole subset of the population who previously had a very difficult time connecting with individuals. You even made that point earlier about atheists, for example, growing up in the Bible Belt, not knowing anybody in their neighborhood who has, similar views. You get online and now you can connect with people.
Right.
So I think that, there are positive outcomes, there are negative outcomes, but to say how much of our new kind of digital world is affecting our relationships, it's impossible to know. I would say it in the same breath, it's both impossible to know and it's completely affecting us.
Yeah.
There's no way that it couldn't. I don't know if it's positive, negative, or net neutral, but the way that we interact is completely changed because we're all connected online.
Yeah. There has definitely been a through line to this whole episode of the show, I think. Of this
Atheism.
of atheism and rationality and something. All right, let's move on. We got one more story. We're probably going to all be destroyed by an asteroid. You probably knew that already. They have been entering our atmosphere for a long, long time. You may remember this one from Russia last year. All right, so that's just one example, and this has been happening all over the place. Russian talk radio sounds really terrible, by the way. But we're just a matter of time away from this. All right, so that's from the movie Deep Impact. Remember that came out like the same week that Armageddon came out? They had 2 asteroid movies. That's the much better one, in my humble opinion. But don't worry about asteroids, people, because the UN is on it, because they're so good at everything, aren't they? The Special Political and Decolonization Committee is welcoming the idea of setting up a series of groups to act as a warning system. They're going to deal with issues related to decolonization, human rights, peacekeeping, outer space, atomic radiation, and more. The UN literally can't do anything on Earth, but apparently we're going to be able to do things off planet. And they also have an Office for Outer Space Affairs. And let's look at the international mechanism which they've set up to deal with asteroids. The International Asteroid Warning Network comprises of a wide spectrum of organizations for discovering, monitoring, and characterizing potential hazardous near-Earth objects. It will recommend criteria for notification of an emergency impact threat and to study and plan response activities. Take it away, Dylan.
Here's the Space Mission Planning Advisory Group statement. The main objective of this group, to be established, would be to lay out the framework, timeline, and options for initiating and executing space mission response activities.
Okay.
The Rubin Report.
The Rubin Report.
There you
It
go.
said it. I had to read the whole thing.
All right, so the UN does not do much of any. They do some good stuff with feeding people, but there's so much. So they do some good
Stupid,
stuff.
hungry people.
No. I'm saying that's good. They do some good stuff, but so much of what they do is just bureaucratic nonsense. We still have people being slaughtered in Syria, and nothing's really changing. So is there any chance that this group of people in suits and ties and bureaucrats and technocrats can sit down and figure out a problem as big as when an asteroid is going to destroy Earth?
Well, I think the truth is that there are space agencies across the world, and those space agencies are not unified. And the hope would be that if there were an impending threat, that one of the space agencies, I don't think that the UN, that this organization is probably going to be the go-to for monitoring of near-Earth impacts, right? They're not going to be monitoring asteroids or meteors very closely. I know that there was some talk about raising enough money to put out a telescope specifically for that, but I think that there are organizations that are better equipped to do that, so long as we don't continue to defund them.
Right.
The problem is those organizations, NASA is an American organization. You have the Russian Space Agency. We've shown that partnerships work very well. We no longer have shuttles, so we now ride the Soyuz capsule to get up to the International Space Station.
Right, isn't that, so people don't really realize this. The Russians actually now have to take us, right, to the International Space Station. We used to go, we don't do that part
anymore. Until kind of a private space company, perhaps SpaceX or Virgin Galactic, can put together a rocket that's not just delivering payload, but can actually deliver humans. We're relying on the Russians now in order to get up to the ISS. So I think the issue here is that we are a globe. We have a global society. If an asteroid is going to impact Earth ultimately, and that is a legitimate possibility, we have to have a plan in place, and relying on any one individual nation to play Big Brother may not be the best way to do it. So whether it's the UN or another global organization, don't get me wrong, we don't have a good track record of playing nice with other countries, but I think that it is important for us to be able to, maybe it sounds like hippy-dippy shit, but to be able to band together and work together to prevent catastrophe.
Right, and that's my point. The UN doesn't really work well together to prevent things that are happening on Earth. So is there any chance we could come together and build some sort of super laser?
Is that the right question, though? Is the right question, is there not a better option?
Pick a question, give me an answer.
There's a couple of subtextual things that are at work here. First of all, recently the Japanese Space Administration, and I don't remember what they're called, redid some math on a meteor that the US had said was not going to impact Earth in 2032, and said, we think it's a lot more likely than you do. And that started to create the sense that there is a need for greater communication between international space agencies. But moreover, this, I think. We as a species have been widely and largely distracted by fantasies of apocalypse since the beginning of organized governance. The sense that things are going to end soon keeps people distracted from solving large societal problems. Mm-hmm. And these societal problems are caused by economic influences far more than by any force of nature. Mm-hmm. And economic influences are purely abstract. I mean, money doesn't really exist. It's just a sort of an agreed upon abstraction of value.
I just watched Zeitgeist, the movie, so I'm on board that.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that someone watched that. That sounds like I had something to do with it, doesn't it?
Did you get your
cut? It's a ringing endorsement
there. So we're dealing with the apocalyptic fantasy of modern America isn't that 5 horsemen, 3 horsemen, however many horsemen are supposed to come. That's not going to happen, and the zombie guy isn't going to come. Now we have a scientific apocalypse fantasy, mm-hmm. and that all sort of frees us of responsibility for things like we're making the Pacific Ocean radioactive. Don't worry about it. A meteorite is going to come in 2032. We've got people starving all over the wealthiest nation in history. Don't worry about it. We're all going to die in a couple of years. We can't really solve all those problems in that much time. And my feeling is what we should do, and again, it may sound hippy-dippy, is set about joining together to solve human problems where we can, as we can, for the good of humanity. And then if there is a sudden horrific death to everything that we know, that can just come as a happy surprise.
Right, then we did the best we could.
I think those are some really, really good points. I think the one thing that I would add to that is that it doesn't have to be an either or scenario. But within a certain organization, perhaps it does. Maybe the UN obviously doesn't have the organizational skills or the manpower to even address some of the humanitarian crises that they were first banded together to be able to address. So maybe this is better left not in the hands of the UN, but of some sort of coalition of the existing space agencies across different nations.
The UN can serve perhaps as a bridging mechanism between them.
They may not even need to. There may be some sort of treaty that could be established amongst the different space agencies. We already see that fundamentally the scientists who work there are interested in preventing catastrophe and in bettering the lives of everybody on the globe through space exploration. They all have a common goal there, which is to learn as much about the cosmos as we can in order to help us more here on Earth. And you already see so many kind of international coalitions that are forming to try and get people to Mars, to try and get people back to the moon, to try and get people, as we were just saying, to the ISS. Why couldn't there be some sort of asteroid watch coalition that was presented between all of those different organizations?
Yeah, so is part of the problem here also that we go, as you're saying, we go from human crisis to human crisis. Remember when everyone thought Y2K was going to end the world, right? Mm-hmm. Then 2 years ago, or was it last year? What year was it? I guess 2012, we thought the Mayan thing was going to rule the world. So we keep making...
Nobody legitimately thought that.
Somebody. There was one guy...
Nobody who read a book really thought that. No.
I thought one person did. But really, when these types of things come up and then nothing happens and everyone always thinks every other year, the Antichrist is coming and that whole thing, that when we actually have something that legitimately could do it, like an asteroid, we can't really band together because we've had these sort of cry wolf moments.
Well, also, I think
so to
even with
speak.
things like asteroids, we are crying wolf. I mean, you see the same thing. You know, there's a difference between legitimate threats and illegitimate threats. You know, is Satan going to come to Earth? No.
Won't he be riding an asteroid? Isn't that what they would say?
No. Is there going to be a zombie apocalypse? No. But when people get scared about swine flu or bird flu, it's more approaching a legitimate fear. Of course, though, there's so much fear-mongering in the media that even swine flu and bird flu weren't legitimate fears for some sort of like cataclysmic event.
Right.
And so I think what it's really about is understanding the data, understanding scale, and being able to know the difference between a legitimate risk
That's exactly
and
right.
a risk that has been blown out of proportion by the
That's
media.
exactly right.
Bring us home again.
Humans love drama. We live for drama. We remember the exciting moments and we seek out the exciting moments. And at this point, we have the most powerful technology for information and education that has ever been available to us. And instead, all we are using it for is titillation of the drama impulse. So, you know, news stations, the purported mainstream news, and I'm using the term so loosely, are in the business of selling Xanax. Because that's their sponsor. And the human mind is hardwired so that if you're in the forest foraging for food and there's a fuzzy rabbit you might be able to eat, you look at the rabbit because it's moving. But then if there's a bear that might kill you, your focus is on the bear.
Yeah.
It's got to be on the bear until the bear is gone. And all the news does now is say, look at the bear, buy Xanax. Look at the bear, buy Xanax. That's all it does.
All right, well, don't look at the bear, people. We're trying to give you some natural Xanax right here. I want to thank Cara, Santa Maria, Dylan, Brody. Subscribe. It's right down there. That's all you got to do. This was the headiest show we have ever done.
Really?
This was good
I'm
fun.
really
really
proud
fun.
of
It was
myself
really
and
fun.
you guys. All right, thanks, guys. We'll do it again next week. Hey, guys, the Rubin Report's brought to you by Coupaw.com. They have up to 75% off pet treats, chews, toys, and more. And if you use code RR, you can get another 20%. That's a lot of percentage right there. I can't do that kind of math. The link is right down below, Coupaw.com, code RR.